Hello everyone, welcome to Fishin, the podcast where we discuss Magic's most competitive tribe and help the whole community become better Merfolk players. I'm Kody, one of the co-hosts of the show, and not Cody Smith on Twitter. And we have a very special guest host today, co-host of the Monkeying Around a Simian Spirit Guide podcast, Johnny Crass. How are you doing, Johnny?
Pretty good. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. We had sent Matt out on assignment. He's being an understudy for Jason Momoa. So we have him out there doing that, for research purposes. But thank you so much for filling in for us today. Where can we find you on the internet?
So it's mainly just on Twitter, which is at Johnny_Crass. For the most part, it's not really Magic content. It's mostly War Games content. But there is a bit of Magic content, but mostly iCube and Modern these days. So
yeah, you do play a bit of Modern, and that's why we have you on this episode, actually. So before we get into the topic and all that, we want to say thank you to all our listeners and subscribers for dealing with me in my absence these past month or so. We are working on getting back into the saddle and getting regular content. So thank you, everybody, as well as for supporting us on Patreon and Inked Gaming, where you can actually get Fishin t-shirts now. I sent out a tweet on Sunday about it, but if you hadn't seen it, there are now official Fishin' a Merfolk Podcast t-shirts from Inked Gaming, and you can use fishcastmtg at checkout to get that 10% off and help support your fishy bros.
I hope those shirts are like fishnet shirts.
They're not, unfortunately. They do have our logo on them. It's very snazzy. Maybe we should do another shirt sometime that's like a Lord of Atlantis cosplay shirt. Like it's just like a set of pecs and abs. But you would find that at any beachside store, really. So you don't need to come to us for that shirt. So we have a new patron. We're going through our backlog of patrons, and this week is actually a $10 patron, and it's Egg Bulhan. So thank you, Egg, for becoming a patron, for supporting us for as long as you have, and joining us in the Discord and all that fun stuff. Egg picked the random Merfolk. So last week we had the Merfolk Wizard token that Johnny just reminded me of. So thank you, Johnny. So it was the Merfolk Wizard token, and this week we have another Merfolk token. And which token is that, Johnny?
It's the hexproof one from Ixalan.
Yeah. So it's a 1/1 with hexproof, and that's it. So just like last week, what we'll do is we'll quickly run through the cards that make this token, but really, and maybe we can talk about its implications in Modern real quick. So the first card is definitely not a card we'd play in Modern. It's Aquatic Incursion, and it's a 3 and a blue for an enchantment. It says when Aquatic Incursion enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 blue Merfolk creature tokens with hexproof, and then you can pay 3 and a blue. Target Merfolk can't be blocked this turn. I cannot see this one seeing any play in Modern ever.
Yeah, it's kind of like a bad Thassa, and she's not exactly Modern playable as is.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Thassa sees fringe play at best, and Aquatic Incursion does not even deserve that. So the next one is Jungleborn Pioneer, which is 2 and a green for a 2/2. But it says when Jungleborn Pioneer enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 blue Merfolk creature token with hexproof. Also not Modern. I don't know. I wouldn't.
This could be like a budget alternative, maybe, for tropical fish, but because it is 2 bodies for kind of a decent price, and if you have lords, but yeah, it's probably not really competitively costed or played.
Yeah, I just think for 2 bodies like in limited, that's not terrible. But if you're playing like any a format where on turn 3, people are doing really broken things, Jungleborn Pioneer just doesn't quite cut it, I don't think.
I mean, that's when you need your bannerets and stuff. And then
Yeah.
it costs two, and it's two bodies for 2 mana. Now you're cooking with gas.
And we're gonna get into that, I'm sure, at some point in our during our discussion. And then the next one I think is probably the closest to modern playable, and that's Deep Root Waters. So Deep Root Waters is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a Merfolk spell, create a 1/1 blue Merfolk creature token with hexproof. Current standard all-star, but I think that this is probably the one that could possibly see play in modern.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weird cross between Monastery Mentor and like Bitter Blossom. Maybe not Bitter Blossom, but it's definitely just Merfolk Monastery Mentor, which that card's used to see quite a bit of play.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, just pumping. Merfolk is a deck that can use a lot of bodies, and so just pumping out bodies like Bitter Blossom does in those types of decks is actually really beneficial. I just don't know if it's really, really, really going to see a lot of modern play. But thank you to Egg for picking this creature token for us for this week's random Merfolk. But we're going to move on to the main topic, which the reason. So our topic this week is brewing within an established format, or I guess not in a format, an established deck archetype. And so the reason I brought you on, Johnny, is because amongst our online Magic group, you are kind of the brew aficionado.
Yeah, I've taken a few brews to a few events and done fairly decently. So I do enjoy a pile of 75 cards.
you have shown me some cards, or some piles of cards, and it's just like, oh, so what does this do? And then you go, well, this happens and this happens. And then I go, uh-huh. And then you go, yeah, so when this happens, then I do this and this and this, and then this happens. And I just go, oh, because I don't know how you do it, honestly. You come up with some really crazy out of the box things, and so that's why I thought you'd be really perfect for this topic. The list that I have in our show notes is a list from Alex Conn. We'll have this list in the show notes, and it is a list from Alex Conn, who is, I guess, one of the premier Merfolk players in the Star City league, I guess. I don't know, do they call them leagues?
I think it's a circuit.
A circuit,
but
yeah.
Yeah, it's the same. It's pretty much the same.
So basically what happened was Alex Conn just placed 43rd. I think he went 10-4, I think, something like that. But he did really well. 43rd place is nothing to sneeze at. So we have basically this is kind of like an established Merfolk list. Johnny, I wanted to ask, like, Merfolk, and this can be applied to any deck in modern. So this could be like Hollow One, Jund, Death Shadow. So what makes you excited about brewing a deck that already kind of has an established shell?
So for me, I look at cards that are kind of forgotten about, especially from the middle sets in Modern's life. So the Time Spiral block and Lorwyn block. And normally there's strength in those sets that I think most Modern players who started later don't really remember. And for decks like Merfolk, I think looking at the Lorwyn block especially, you see kind of some relics of cards that maybe are playable, but just don't have the right list just yet.
Okay, so it's kind of like what I'm getting from that is like you're looking at, because a lot of people look at, like, 8th and 9th edition and see like cards like Blood Moon and stuff like that, and they know there's power there. And it's kind of easy to keep those new sets in mind because they're constantly being printed, but it's kind of keeping in mind the areas where people don't tend to look very often, and kind of just keep, like, dog-earing things that you think are kind of cool because something might come later and go, oh yeah, this would work with that.
Yeah, that's pretty much. When you first contacted me about this, a list I've been toying around with for a while is Blue Black Merfolk,
Mm-hmm.
because of just how much I love Sig River Cutthroat and the prowl mechanic. And I didn't get something concrete from that, but just there are black merfolk that in the right meta would be something I think to look at.
Yeah, I think unfortunately the black merfolk that we have from the Lorwyn block are a little overcosted, or maybe not overcosted, but they do cost a lot, and just modern is a really fast format. So, would you say that that taking into consideration the speed of the format is a big part of brewing, or
So, I mean, the speed of the format I think is probably one of the most important things in modern. When you look at decks like Phoenix and Dredge, and these just like swelteringly fast decks that are doing well right now, I don't think you can build decks that are designed to beat like Jund and Mardu, right? Like the speed difference is just so noticeable.
yeah.
But I think certain archetypes lose themselves in trying to adapt to that speed, and they lose some of their strength because of it. Like we see that right now with Jund for me, where the deck is trying to keep what it was, but also be able to answer these faster decks. And I think for Merfolk, and especially going back to this list that you sent me, I think we see this Merfolk list starting to answer the faster decks, but still retain its identity. We're
Mm-hmm.
playing Deprives, we're playing Biomancers now, and these cards they're a lot more tempo oriented. And when I look at Benethik Biomancer over, say, Curse Catcher, I think it really shows you where this archetype has evolved, but also it keeps up with the speed now, the looter over the spell pierce.
Yeah, I agree that Merfolk is one of those decks that obviously has its shell. So I mean, you're never gonna get away from Master of the Pearl Trident or Lord of Atlantis or Silvergill Adept, and even kind of the namesake card for any tribal deck, which is Aether Vial. But and I'm sure you've played around with Aether Vial and non-tribal decks as well. But it's one of those things that, like you said, you have to kind of adjust, and your card selections can really be affected by what's going on. And like right now, modern is pretty fast, so Curse Catcher doesn't do quite as much as it used to, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think how like how vastly used Phantasmal Image is also kind of shows what you're talking about with Aether Vial, where you see all these tribal decks starting to just gravitate towards probably the best clone ever printed, and just how strong it is with the Lord and tribal strategies.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, Phantasmal Image is used also in humans, and I'm sure it's used in pretty much any tribal deck that uses blue. Phantasmal Image is so good because it's the thing is like pretty much every removal spell in modern would kill it anyway, so the downside is not a downside.
Yeah.
And so now, the problem with Merfolk, I think, even though we do have strong cards like Phantasmal Image and Aether Vial, is we have a lot of other tribal decks, and I know that humans has kind of slid off a little bit. It's not quite as big a deal as it once was, but we also have a lot of goblins coming in Modern Horizons and slivers as well. So we might be seeing a lot more tribal decks. How do you see a creature deck answering other creature decks, or like what are some tips that you would give to, like, what are the cards we should look for?
So you mentioned humans kind of sliding off the scale, and I think the deck that is the new gold standard, at least for me, for tribes, is Spirits. And I know Spirits isn't super popular right now because it has a weird Phoenix and Dredge matchup, but cards like Spell Queller really feel like the tribal answer to both creature decks and the other decks. And Merfolk, I don't know what that card for Merfolk is. I don't know two. If there's anything in Horizons, that could be that card for Merfolk. But I think that's the card to really look out for tribal decks. Is that your tribe spell queller? If that makes sense.
I think it's Pact of Will.
Really, you like that
No,
card?
I'm just. I was kidding. But you know, I think that's you know, kind of the crux of it is, you know, I mean, obviously they can print humans in every set, so they don't have to worry about that. When it comes to spirits, there are limited sets that they can put them in, but it seems like they had a really strong set where they were able to just go like, yeah, let's put this on a spirit. And it kind of seems like that gift was not kind of rolled over into Merfolk, where, you know, spirits and humans have gotten some really strong additions lately, and unfortunately Merfolk doesn't quite have an answer as strong as Spell Queller.
Yeah, it seems like in Ixalan and Rixalan, they thought the thing Merfolk needs is more lords. I think what they really needed was an actual tool rather than their fifth lord.
Yeah, and actually that does kind of lead us into an interesting kind of history lesson for brewing in Merfolk, and that's, you know, right when Rivals of Ixalan and the first set Ixalan, when those sets came out and people started, you know, doing what was called Swolfolk, they started basically going like, oh, let's just do, you know, top end is 3 drops, and just all, you know, just lords and curse catchers and spell pierces, and, you know, really get them. And some people even went so far as to do the Coco route, which I know some spirits decks take full advantage of. But the thing was, you know, Tropical Merfolk did okay for a little bit, but then, you know, it turns out just lords.deck doesn't win games.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about what makes the little creature decks still viable and modern. And when you look at humans, spirits, even death and taxes, an answer comes back, and it's a card as a brewer that I hate, but Little Thalia. And I wonder, and you're, well, way more versed with Merfolk than I am, but do you think there's a way to include some number of Thalias in the Merfolk 75 and still have the deck doing what it needs to do?
I know that Nikachu has played around with some blue white variations, and actually it might be interesting to revisit it once we have the Horizon lands. You know, the new dual the new dual lands that you can crack for a card. That might be the card that we would need to, if we wanted to do like a blue white splash and have Baby Thalia. Baby Thalia, for those of you guys who are not aware, that's the one that non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would definitely help slow down other creature decks, as well as just, you know, good removal decks like Jund and Death Shadow and stuff like that, and also blue white control. I think it would help out with it a little bit as well.
Yeah, she helps in. I've found that she gets boarded in more matchups than you might think. And a lot of decks, I think it's more proper to play her in the 60 because she's almost always brought in from the board. And when a card gets to that frequency, you need to find room for it in the main.
I'd say probably the only deck that it wouldn't be super helpful against is like other creature decks.
Yeah, other Aether Vial decks, she does not do much, but then again, neither does their Thalia. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you're playing Death and Taxes in Modern, you're probably running some number of Thalias. All right, so we've talked a little bit about like what gets you excited to brew and what are cards that we should look for when we're brewing. So now let's say we've pulled up this list. What role has net decking played in your brewing? So for example, like we have this Merfolk list pulled up. And it's an established format or an established deck in the format. And this is kind of like if you were to just like say I want to play a Merfolk deck, you would just print this out and you'd be fine.
Yeah.
But so like when you're brewing, you kind of have to, at least with a deck like this, you kind of have to start. You have to have a starting point, right?
Yeah. So what I call that when I brew is the sacred cows. So if you're brewing, say, Tron, your sacred cows are ancient Stern and Tron lands, right? You don't touch them. They're the base of your deck. You work up. Any artifact deck, it's Mox Opals. And I think for Merfolk, it's your two lords plus the phantasmal image. Those are your sacred cows. You just don't touch that. But everything.
I would also say Silvergill Adept.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but I see what you mean. Like you don't like you can't have a Merfolk deck without Lord of Atlantis and all that, because that's the core of how the deck works.
Yeah. But everything else, besides those objects, I think are free game, and then you just are trying to find the numbers that work. So I think when I was talking earlier about Benthic Biomancer, I think the 4 Biomancers are a number that works. That card lets you filter out lands because we're a 20 land deck, but any low to the ground aggro tribal deck secretly wants to be like a 17 land deck.
Yeah.
We just can't afford that. And Biomancer helps us a little bit with not being able to afford that.
You know, one other thing that has helped that I learned on stream the other day with Benthic Biomancer is Benthic Biomancer is also helpful against decks that are running Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize, because what you can do is in response you can Benthic Biomancer and just take something away that they were going to take anyway. Like just like bin something and get an extra land or something. But I see what you mean. Like, you know, obviously if Merfolk could run, or I mean any deck like this, human spirits, if they could run 17 lands, they would probably try it.
Yeah. A lot of my brews, and normally this gets smoothed out, but a lot of my brews start with 4 Street Wraith and 2 Mishra's Bauble, and then I work my way backwards because I'm like, well, how few cards can I play in a 60 card modern deck? And normally it turns out to be a mistake, but that's the idea, is you want to play as few lands as possible while still being able to cast those spells for the low to the ground decks. Because Merfolk isn't a control deck. It's a tempo. It's like fairies. It's like goblins. But actually, when I brought up fairies, I didn't even think about this before we started talking. But I think that's what a lot of Merfolk players should look at as far as an archetype that hasn't been able to adapt, whereas Merfolk has really adapted to modern. When I first got into competitive Magic, fairies was the tempo deck. Mm-hmm. And now it just really didn't survive the transition into modern, where Merfolk has survived and in some years, some metas actually thrived in this format. And it's because the cards have adapted. Fairies never got their tropical fairy season. They never got their fairy Biomancer.
Yeah, that's true, and I mean, fairies do still get printed fairly often. It's not like they're not showing up, it's just they're probably just not with the frequency or the power level that would require modern to have, I guess.
Yeah.
So now we've talked about you know, where's room for us to brew. So now in a deck like Merfolk, which is generally mono blue, what are some things that would maybe push you into colors that it's not normally in? So like for example, Merfolk sometimes has variations like Bolt Folk, where they play like the red blue lands, and they'll throw in like a play set of bolts and a play set of Wizard's Lightning. You know, just to kind of because most of the creatures are wizards. On top of, you know, just so having 8 bolts in your deck seems pretty fun. But like, what is something that would make you say like, oh, we should add blue, we should add red to this, or we should add white to this because XYZ.
So I think actually you mentioned it earlier, but the horizons, the new enemy colored horizon canopies, the blue red one could well make Bolt Folk something I'd be interested in, because now we have quite a few dual lands that don't come into play untapped, help us cast our things, and can just fire off the bolt when we need to.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not a deck too concerned about our life total because we're trying to race them. So
Yeah.
more fast dual lands makes me like the idea of Bolt Folk more, and the fact that the land cantrips is just a positive.
Yeah, so once you have 3 or 4 red sources, or 2 or 3 red sources, you really don't need it. You could just cash it in for an extra card, and then maybe even get an extra bolt, or get the lord that you need to just kind of, pummel over everybody.
Yeah. The other thing, I've always liked blue white, and I remember when most Merfolk decks in Modern were predominantly blue white, and it feels like it ebbs and flows with how good Stony Silence is. But with the new little Ophi creature, who is just Stony Silence on a 2/2, it might actually make Tropical, like, give Tropical another look, because now you still get to play Stony Silence. You still get to play your other lords. And you can Vile him or Coco him into play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something you could never do with Stony Silence. And he's not a dead draw. Where, like, when you need a blocker and you draw Stony Silence, it's the worst feeling in the world.
Yeah.
But he's a 2/2 bear. He buys you a turn.
Yeah, that's true. And like you said, it does kind of put a stumbling block in front of a lot of problem decks that we have. Decks like Affinity that are just blisteringly fast. Decks like yours that use Mishra's Bauble to kind of get ahead. It seems like that would be pretty good. Plus, we have the blue-green Horizon land, so that's pretty cool. I mean, that we may have to revisit Swolfolk here in a little bit.
We joked a little bit about Force of Negation. I think that's what the card's name is. But talking about Swolfolk, the green Force is actually, I think, the best card out of that cycle. And I think people are sleeping on that card right now, but the double shatter for free is pretty good. And if we have enough green cards to make that a viable sideboard option, that's another reason to give, like, Tropical Swolfolk a look, I think.
Yeah, so the card that Johnny's referring to is Force of Vigor, which is 2 green for an instant. If it's not your turn, you may exile a green card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost, and it's destroy up to 2 target artifacts and/or enchantments. So yeah, I mean, that seems very strong. I mean, at the very least, as a sideboard card, because one of the cards that we've been playing in the sideboard of Swolfolk is Nature's Claim. Just because it's a one cost card that just blows up a problem. Force of Vigor at 4 mana might be a little too expensive, but it's definitely worth a test for sure.
Yeah, don't sleep on free cards. They're made that way for a reason.
There's something going on if it's free, right?
Yeah.
So now when a new set comes out, obviously, in our little Magic group, we're constantly sharing new cards that are coming out and all that fun stuff, and we're always getting really excited about new tools for each of our decks in our group. And Johnny, I love it when you point out new cards, because you're always like, oh, remember this deck that I showed you guys like 12 years ago? This will go in that. So when you see a card like you kind of pointed out the Collector Oof, how do you keep track of where these new cards go?
So I have on MTG Goldfish, I have an unfinished catalog of brews. The decks just kind of sit in their own little folder, and they just wait for that one piece. I have a few friends at my local shop. We play a modern tournament every Monday, and I'll normally just toss a deck in their hands and be like, tell me how it goes. So I'm constantly testing these brews, but when I see the missing piece, which right now for me is the new uh, Trinket Mage, and I can't remember its name, but it finds a 2-drop, and that's been the
Tribute
missing piece.
Mage.
Yeah, and it's been the missing piece for like 2 of my brews for probably years. And now those brews come out of their little folder, and we're going to try them for a few months. But it's just remembering what the one deck was missing, and then getting excited when you finally see a piece that might fit.
Okay, so it's kind of like if you were, say, a songwriter, you just kind of write down everything that comes to your head, because that might be the piece of the song that you need to finish a new song. So you just kind of just store them away, in hopes that something, there's going to be a card at some point that this fits in.
Yeah, I think the best example is I took last year at GP Vegas. I took Dubious Challenge to the main event, and I was a game off of day twoing, and it was kind of a little bit frustrating. But the main thing, and the deck is designed around playing Dubious Challenge and Brooding Saurian, and Brooding Saurian at your end step gave you control of all your permanents. And then a few months later, they printed the new Tristani, who does the exact same thing. And all of a sudden, the deck went from being kind of a pile that I was trying to make work to something that finally got its second copy. And now I think I'm going to try to take it to GP Vegas again this year, and we'll see what happens.
Well, we'll definitely be rooting for you from the coolness of our homes. I know that GP Vegas does tend to run a little hot, so make sure to bring some extra water.
It is quite warm.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think we did a pretty good job of covering everything. I guess I have one more question though, and that is what like. So you use MTG Goldfish, which is what I primarily use. So when you're out and about, like just in class or on your way to someplace, and you think of something, like what is your tool to use to put that idea like down on paper?
So if you look at my legal studies notebook from the last 2 semesters, every other page is a rough sketch of a deck list, and then it's back to legal studies notes. So it'll be like how to file like a civil tort, and then the next page is for Grizzlebrand, for Ilharg, for Through the Breach, and then we're back to class notes. So I pretty much just always have something.
You're just always scribbling things down just as it comes to your head.
Yeah, in the hopes that one of them sticks.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, at least you're putting your tuition money to good use, right?
Yeah, that's the education I need.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what else are they gonna do for you? They're just gonna call you once or twice a year to ask if you want to donate to your alma mater, right? So. That transaction is over. Well, thank you so much, Johnny. Where can we find you on the internet?
On Twitter is really the only thing I use, which is Johnny_Crass. That's pretty much it. You can also find me on Cube Tutor if you want to draft through some of my cubes. But that's about it. And every now and then I'll be on Cockatrice.
Yeah, you have a pretty baller commander cube that you update quite regularly. So I do like looking through that from time to time, and every once in a while you kind of just poke in your updates to the cube, which is really cool. I like seeing those.
I'm a foil junkie, so.
Me too, unfortunately. Well, thank you again so much. Remember, you can reach out and talk to me on Twitter. At Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, I suppose, is at fishcastmtg. Personally, on Twitter, I'm not Kody Smith, which is basically if you want to find me somewhere on the internet, if you want to find me, that's where to find me. My co-host Matt is on Twitter as Matthew Caudill 8. If you have a longer form question, you can feel free to email us at fishcastmtg@gmail.com. Our cover art was made by Tessa and Hunter Pruitt, and our logo and stream art was done by Ishton on Twitter. And Jake Boss MTG on Twitter did our animated intro for our YouTube videos and whatnot. If you like what we're doing here, please rate and subscribe in the Apple or Google Play podcast app stores, as well as find us on Patreon at patreon.com/fishcastmtg. Thank you again, Johnny, for coming on the show. Again, on such short notice, you really kind of saved my neck here. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Any time to reunite the Simian Spirit Guide podcast is good for me.
We need to get on episode 2 of that here shortly.
I mean, when they give me my Merfolk Spirit Guide, I'll definitely be on one of the 2 shows.
Yeah, definitely. We could probably just have you on both just to talk about it, because I'm sure a Merfolk Spirit Guide would be really great for Merfolk, actually.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like True Name Nemesis or something.
No, definitely not. But just being able to discard a card for free for extra mana to, it would just be cool. All right, thank you everybody for your time, and we'll see you all next week.